Hello friends, and welcome to this week's Bible study. Studying the book of Daniel, and this is our 15th part, and today we're going to look at most of chapter 11. The early larger part of this chapter describes in great and accurate detail the final days of the Persian Empire and the events of the Grecian Empire. It is as though the heavenly visitor who's describing this to Daniel is reading an historic account. But in reality, none of these events had yet taken place. The actual events took place in the period between the Old Testament and the New Testament, in the 450 years of apparent prophetic silence. Doubtless the detail of Daniel's prophecy served as a great encouragement to God's people who were in the land at that period of time. The great lesson of this chapter is that our God, the unchanging one, knows the end from the beginning, and he is in absolute control. Whatever is done is according to his will and purpose. He has appointed the times and seasons. Sometimes it is difficult to see why any value or purpose it may exist in the things that befall us in this life. We cannot understand why God has allowed such a turn of events. Is it a time of correction or purification, persecution, or just the trial of our faith? Whatever the reason, we need to remain full of faith regarding him who is faithful. The main focus of verses 2 to 35 are upon the conflict between the northern and southern kingdoms, which were two of the four portions of the divided Greek Empire. The directions were viewed from the glorious land. We'll read that in the text, and that of course is Israel. The kingdom of the north was the Seleucid Empire based in Syria, and 7 kings of that empire are mentioned in these verses. The kingdom of the south was the Ptolemaic Empire, which was based in Egypt, and 6 kings are mentioned in these verses, that is verses 2 to 35. And the lands, in the 19-year period between 320 and 301 BC, southern Syria and the lands down to the border of Egypt changed hands 5 times as these 2 kingdoms contended for strategic harbours that would give them dominion of the Eastern Mediterranean. Some commentators believe that chapter 11 refers to recent and future events from verse 19 onwards. They try to see the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the British mandate over Palestine in verses 19 and 20. However, this seems fanciful, since there is a close correlation between verses 19 to 32 and well-documented historical facts. So let us indeed consider, we've already read verse 1 at the end of our last session, so we're going to read Daniel chapter 11 verses 2 to 4. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than them all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up against the realm of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And then when he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided towards the 4 winds of heaven. But not among his prosperity, nor according to his dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be uprooted, even for others beside these. Now this 4th Persian king mentioned here is Xerxes, also known as Ahasuerus, who's indeed in the book of Esther. Under his rule at that time, Haman the Agagite obtained royal consent to have all the Jews killed. But God delivered his people by the petitions of Queen Esther. And that's of course all recorded in the book of Esther, particularly chapter 3. Xerxes' father Darius had attempted to conquer Athens in 490 BC, but his forces were defeated at the Battle of Marathon. To avenge this early defeat, Xerxes invaded Greece in 480 BC with 1 million men, as recorded by Herodotus. The Persians were successful in overrunning much of Greece and destroying Athens, but later they suffered great naval defeats at the Battle of Salamis. Xerxes now withdrew most of his force in haste, but he left behind a force of 100,000 men. In the following year, his army was defeated by the Greeks at the Battle of Plateo. This failure broke the power of the Persian Empire. And the mighty king mentioned in the verses we read, who shall arise, was of course Alexander III, also known by Alexander the Great. And he conquered Persia in 331 BC. But following Alexander's death in 323 BC, his brother Philip was murdered in 317 BC. Then Alexander's son, Alexander IV, was murdered in 310 BC. And so we can see his kingdom did not go to his prosperity. Eventually the kingdom was divided between Alexander's 4 generals. Macedonia, Greece, went to Antipater and his son Cassander. Lysimachus ruled over Thrace, Asia Minor. Seleucus Nictor ruled over the rest of Asia except Lower Palestine, Syria and Palestine. And Ptolemy, son of Lagus, ruled over Egypt and Palestine. Then we come to verse 5. Also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. So the prince who gained power over the king of the south was Seleucus Nictor. Originally, Seleucus had served Perdiccas and Antiochus in Babylon, but he defected Ptolemy I in Egypt. After Antiochus was defeated, Ptolemy sponsored Seleucus to return to Babylon. And in 310, Seleucus became king over Alexander's eastern domain, and now his power surpassed that of Ptolemy I. Daniel 11 verses 6 to 8. And at the end of some years they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand. But she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. But from a branch of her roots one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt, with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So in 252 BC, Ptolemy II of Egypt gave his daughter Bernice in marriage to Antiochus II of Syria to conclude a peace treaty. In order to marry Bernice, Antiochus had to divorce his first wife Laodice, who was also banished. And actually Antiochus had founded the city of Laodicea, which is in now Turkey. And this is the city named after Laodice, which is mentioned in Revelation chapter 3. However, Laodice was very influential, and she conspired to have Bernice and her infant son murdered. Soon after, Antiochus was poisoned and Laodice became queen. Ptolemy III ruled in Egypt from 246 to 221 BC. When he ascended to the Egyptian throne, he declared he would avenge the death of his sister Bernice. He is the branch of her roots mentioned in verse 7. In a war that lasted from 246 to 241 BC, Ptolemy III broke the Seleucid navy and pillaged their kingdom. He took much spoil back to Egypt, including the Egyptian idols that Cambyses the Persian had taken in 524 BC. The return of these idols made Ptolemy III a hero in the eyes of the Egyptian people. The end of verse 8 in the New King James Version sounds like the king of the south will live longer than the king of the north. However, other translations say that the king of the south will refrain from attacking the king of the north for many years. In 240 BC, Ptolemy III made a peace treaty with Seleucus II. Then we come indeed to the passage about Antiochus the Great. So in Daniel 11 verses 9 to 12 we read, "Also the king of the north shall come down to the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. However, his sons shall stir up strife and assemble a great multitude of forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through, and he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. And the king of the south shall be moved with rage and go out and fight with him, with the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. When he is taken away, when he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail." So verse 9 probably refers to military action taken by Seleucus II to regain northern Syria and Phoenicia. The sons of Seleucus II were Seleucus III, and he reigned for 3 years, and Antiochus III, who became known as Antiochus the Great. Antiochus led a great force into Palestine against the forces of Ptolemy IV in 219/218 BC. But the invaders were defeated. Verse 13, "For the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great army and much equipment." After the death of Ptolemy IV, Antiochus returned to invade Egypt in 203 BC. Ptolemy V ruled in Egypt, but he was only a boy. Verses 14 to 16. "Now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also violent men of your own people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mount and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land with the destruction in his power." When Antiochus's forces attacked the Egyptian forces in Palestine, the pro-Seleucid Jews joined the invaders. However, an Egyptian counter-offensive led by General Scopas meant that these Jews were punished. The counter-offensive stalled, and General Scopas retreated with his troops into Sidon. Antiochus now laid siege to Sidon until the surrender of Scopas. Antiochus was welcomed as a deliverer into Jerusalem in 198 BC. Verse 17, "He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or be for him." Antiochus was now able to totally subdue Egypt. Ptolemy V was only about 10 years old, but Antiochus made the Egyptian king marry Antiochus's daughter, Cleopatra. He obviously thought to control Egypt through Cleopatra. However, Cleopatra eventually sided with her husband and the Ptolemaic cause. Their son, Ptolemy VI, held no allegiance to the Seleucid kingdom. Verses 18 and 19. After this he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall take many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end, and with the reproach removed he shall turn back on him. Then he shall turn his face towards the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Antiochus's attention was now upon the coastlands. He was at war with the principality of Pergamon and the island of Rhodes. Antiochus had given asylum to Hannibal, an action that was resented by Rome. So when the inhabitants of Rhodes requested help from Rome, they sided against Antiochus. After numerous naval and land battles, Antiochus's forces were defeated by the Romans at Magnesia in Asia Minor in 190 BC. The Romans dictated severe peace terms, including taking Antiochus's second son, Antiochus IV, hostage to Rome and breaking up the Seleucid army and imposing a heavy annual taxation. Antiochus the Great died in 178 BC. He was killed by an angry mob at Elymas when he attempted to raise funds by robbing the temple of Baal. Daniel 11 verse 20. There shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or battle. Antiochus' successor was his eldest son, Seleucus IV. He sent Heliodorus to rob and desecrate the temple in Jerusalem, which is of course the glorious kingdom. And I have a quote here from Archer in the Expositor's Bible commentary. It was only because of a frightful vision of mighty angels assaulting and flogging him that Heliodorus desisted from this invasion of the temple of Yahweh and returned home empty-handed. Archer doesn't actually describe the source of his information, but it is interesting. So after reigning for 12 years, Seleucus was poisoned by Heliodorus. Verse 21. Now we're moving on to Antiochus Epiphanes. And in his place shall arise a vile person, to whom they will not give the honour of royalty, but he shall come peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. The vile person in verse 21 is Antiochus IV. He is the little horn that arises on the goat in the vision of Daniel chapter 8. He killed many Jews and did his uttermost to destroy the Jewish religion. His brother Seleucus had a son and heir, Demetrius I, but he was held hostage at Rome. With Demetrius absent, Antiochus was made prince regent, but through promises of promotion and favour, he seized the kingdom by intrigue in 175 BC. Antiochus IV called himself Antiochus Epiphanes with the added title of Theos. This means illustrious God or God manifest. This title was minted on all his coins. His enemies called him Epiphanes, which means madman or furious. Daniel 11 verses 22 to 27. The force of a flood, they shall be swept away from before him and broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of peoples. He shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. He shall stir up his power and courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. Both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table. But it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. Verses 22 to 27 appear to describe the continuing conflict between the Seleucid and Ptolemaic kingdoms. Ptolemy IV, the son of Ptolemy VI, the son of Ptolemy V and Cleopatra, invaded Palestine and Phoenicia in an attempt to regain the lost lands. Initially, Ptolemy's well-equipped army enjoyed great success, but ultimately the invasion stalled and Ptolemy was captured by Antiochus. The Egyptians now installed Ptolemy VI's younger brother, Phison, as king. So unable to obtain a ransom for his prisoner, Antiochus decides to offer Ptolemy a treaty in return for re-establishing him as king in Egypt. After reinstalling Ptolemy as king, the Seleucid army maintained a garrison at Pelusium, right on the Egyptian border. Ptolemy, being suspicious of Antiochus's intents, made peace with his disposed brother, and together they raised up a sizable army to expel the Seleucid forces. In these verses, the prince of the covenant and the one who eats the portion of his delicacies is considered to be Phison. Some commentators see the prince of the covenant referring to the Jewish high priest, Antiochus IV, who we will mention later. The two kings who speak lies to each other are considered to be Antiochus and Ptolemy, who made a treaty. Verse 28, while returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant, so he shall do damage and return to his own land. Prior to Ptolemy's revolt, Antiochus returned from Egypt with great riches. The Seleucid monarch was interfering with the religion of the Jews, referred to here as the Holy Covenant. Having received a bribe from Jason, a younger member of the Jewish high priest family, Antiochus had the legitimate priest, Antiochus III, disposed. However, later another member of the family, Menelaus, offered Antiochus a larger bribe and secured the title from Jason. In order to pay the Seleucid monarch, Menelaus robbed the temple. Antiochus, who was still had a lot of influence among the Jews, protested to Menelaus, who had the disposed priest killed. The death of the respected Antiochus caused the people of Jerusalem to complain to their Seleucid overlords. Antiochus did have the assassin employed by Menelaus put to death, but the high priest was protected and with his position with a further bribe. Antiochus even had the delegation of Jews who had complained against Menelaus put to death in Tyre. Verses 29 to 31. At the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter, for ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the covenant, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. So after Ptolemy VI and his brother Phison defeated the Seleucid forces at Pelusium, Antiochus raised a large army and attacked Egypt. His siege of Alexandria was abruptly halted by the intervention of the Roman fleet. The Greek word translated in the text as Cyprus is actually Kitium, which means Western Isles. So the Roman fleet was sent to Alexandria to tell Antiochus to quit Egypt immediately or face the consequence of war with Rome. Humiliated, Antiochus retreats from Egypt, passing through the Holy Land. Jason had heard a rumour that Antiochus had been killed in Egypt and had seized the opportunity to raise a sizable force, overthrow and imprison Menelaus, and slaughter a large number of citizens. So Antiochus, now further enraged by Jason's actions, halts his army at Jerusalem and decides to suppress the Jewish religion altogether. He attacks the city, killing 80,000 men, women and children. With Menelaus' help, he entered into the Holy of Holies and carried off some of the gold and silver vessels. He forbade Jewish practices such as circumcision, the Sabbath, and their dietary laws. He sought to Hellenize Israel, and in 167 BC, he erected a Greek altar within the temple. However, and offered sow's flesh upon the altar, and a cult of Olympian Zeus replaced the worship of God in the temple. Every settlement was ordered to worship Zeus and other deities. Jews who refused to abandon their ancient faith were killed or enslaved, but many fled to the hills and the wilderness. Although verses 31 describes the activities of Antiochus IV, we know from Jesus' teaching that history will be repeated. Jesus said, this is recorded in Mark 13:14, "So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing where it ought not, let the reader understand. And let those who are in Judah flee to the mountains." Daniel 11:32-35. "Those who do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by the sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join them by intrigue. And some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time." So in contrast to the likes of Jason and Menelaus, there will be at this time of great persecution faithful men of Israel who know their God, who are strengthened by him, and who carry out great exploits. Doubtless these men of faith and valour are the like of Matthias the priest and his 5 sons, John, Simon, Judas, Maccabeus, and Eleazar and Jonathan. This family from the town of Modin started a guerrilla-style warfare with the Seleucid forces in 168 BC. This became known as the Maccabean Revolt. These events are recorded within the Apocrypha in the 1st and 2nd Maccabees. The initial military encounter was a disaster for the Israelite defenders, as they refused to fight on the Sabbath, the day the Syrian forces attacked. Having revised their willingness to fight on the Sabbath, the Israelites defeated 3 successive Seleucid armies. Matthias died in 165 BC, either from sickness or from his wounds. Eleazar died engaging the feared elephant core. He plunged his sword into the chest of an elephant, but the dying beast fell and crushed him. Judas managed to liberate the temple area on the 16th of December 165 BC. The temple was cleansed from its defilement, an event celebrated each year in the Jewish feast of Hanukkah. It was 3 years to the day since the temple had been defiled by Antiochus IV. Now, Antiochus IV died in Persia in 164 BC. He was replaced by his son Antiochus V, who defeated Judas Maccabeus at the siege of Jerusalem. Antiochus V ruled from 164 to 162 BC, when he was overthrown and murdered by his uncle Demetrius I, the son of Seleucus. Judas was killed in battle at Elzar in 161 BC, and Jonathan now led the revolt, which was greatly helped by the disarray in the Syrian kingdom. Eventually, in 143 BC, the Jews were able to gain independence from the Seleucid Empire. Jonathan was killed in 142 BC, and Simon became high priest. The Maccabean victory over the Seleucid Empire is also foretold by the prophet Zechariah 9:13. For I have bent Judah my bow, fitted the bow with Ephraim, and raised up your sons, O Zion, against your sons, O Greece, and made you like the sword of a mighty man. The Hasmonean dynasty had started, and Simon, the son of Matthias, being recognized as high priest, and his descendants took the titles of high priest and king. After 5 generations, a man married into this empire, and he became known as Herod the Great. Jewish independence lasted until 63 BC, when the Romans, under Pompey, overthrew the remains of the Seleucid Empire and made Palestine a province. The little help mentioned in verse 34 probably refers to a small number of Jews who willingly joined the rebellion. When Judas began to put to death those Jews who collaborated with the Syrians, many more joined his forces, but only to save their own lives. As a result, a large proportion of the Israeli forces were insincere. These are they who, we read, shall join with them by intrigue. These men assisted later Syrian forces who attacked after Antiochus's death. To human minds, to fall is to fail. But we see in verses 35 that God purposes that some of his saints fall, so that they shall be refined and purified. We're going to end our study there today, and we will pick up again in the end of chapter 11 and finish on chapter 12 next time. So we see here that actually, although the description given by the visitor to Daniel is hard to understand when we read it, when compared carefully to historic events, we see how accurate it was. A copy of the book of Daniel was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and when dated by carbon dating, it was proven that actually it had been written before these events took place. So we know of the prophetic accuracy of this book. One recurring phrase that we read in those verses was about the appointed time. Kingdoms of the earth indeed attempt to establish their will and their purposes, but when it's not God's appointed time, they cannot do so, because our God reigns. Well, the Lord bless you and keep you, and make his face to shine upon you, and make you take indeed courage to stand in these days, knowing that the word of God is sure and faithful, and he indeed will establish us in his will and purposes. Amen.